We are going live.
Okay.
This
is Lalit Bhasin. I happen to be the summit chair for this Indo-American Chamber of Commerce and Services Export Promotion Council joint effort in this services summit. Actually, I have nothing to do in a way with travel, tourism and hospitality, but looking at it another way, I think I have everything to do with all the three sectors mentioned here. This is my 59th year in the profession, and I think out of these 59 years, more than 50 years, I have been associated with the hospitality, tourism, and travel industry and the civil aviation. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you to this very important session on travel, tourism, and hospitality, living with COVID yesterday, today, and tomorrow. We have illustrious and very eminent speakers and panelists here, led by Mr. Ajay Bakaya, a very versatile hotelier, known, I think, all over now. He travels to all parts of the world, setting up new projects and running projects in India. He will introduce the panelists and take the proceeding forward. But I just wanted to highlight 2 or 3 issues for your consideration, since the Honorable Secretary's Ministry of Tourism is also present here. We welcome you, sir, Mr. Arvind Singh ji, to this.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. My concern is, as a lawyer, that there has to be a reasonableness and uniformity in the approach, you see, of the government authorities, in the approach of the legislation, so far as these 3 sectors are concerned. You cannot compare them with the manufacturing activities. Therefore, what is required, and I have been saying that for more than 2 decades, that there has to be like a separate labor code for services sector. You can't have the same laws applicable to the labor class who work in the manufacturing activities, who work in the industrial establishments. Then you see those who are working in hospitality or aviation or tourism sector. As someone said, a hotel is a home away from home. So obviously there would be different considerations. Therefore, there is a imperative need to have separate labor laws for the services sector with particular reference, you see, to the 3 limbs of the sector, that is travel, tourism, and hospitality. Second issue is that there has to be some rationality in the matter of the property taxes, the municipal taxes, which are imposed, you see, on the hotels, on the restaurants and other establishments. They are again treated as if they are, you know, like in commercial offices and all that, and same set of principles would apply. So during these difficult times, there may have been some breach of contracts and all that. Now, breach of contract can work both ways. If you are in breach of contract, you can, you see, say, okay, force majeure, reasons beyond control and all that. But if you are aggrieved by breach of contract by someone else, then you see the other person can also take the same logic. Therefore, these are the issues which possibly have arisen. They have arisen, I know it, you see, and would arise in the near future also. So you have to be alert and aware about these issues which will come up. Now, after these introductory remarks, I have great pleasure in handing over the proceedings to the session moderator, Mr. Ajay Bakaya. You see, the profiles of all the worthy speakers have already been circulated, but it depends upon the moderator, and they would like to formally introduce the panelists. Over to you, Mr. Bakaya.
Thank you, Mr. Basian. Mr. Basian, Shri Arvind Singh ji, Ross Beliveau, Ragini, Jyotish, welcome to the session. I am going to do brief introductions of my panelists, but I'll do them one by one. I'll start with the question answer format straight away, if I have everyone's permission. So I'll start with my oldest colleague and very dear friend, Ragini. Ragini Chopra is now the Group Head of Corporate Affairs for Interglobe Enterprises. She has spent several years before that in other hotels. Similar experience with Jet Airways, and now Interglobe, three major enterprises. Ragini is very active in WTTC, ASSOCHAM, FICCI, PATA, etc., etc., etc. Ragini, question for you. COVID's turned the whole world upside down. How is aviation tomorrow going to be different from what it has been, from what we've been used to over the last so many years? And do India and the US have some lessons to learn from each other?
Thank you, Ajay. So I do want to clarify that even today, I represent not only aviation, but also hospitality, because my company is in both and in the travel-related sectors as well. So we obviously, like anybody else in this sector, have been deeply impacted. But I'm not going to look at the yesterday, I'm going to look at the tomorrow, and that's your question. And let me speak now specifically on aviation. So I think everybody knows it was deeply impacted, but what's happening in the future is that we are beginning to see some green shoots. And I think that's more to do with the vaccination, a little bit of the abatement of the virus in many countries. And I'm speaking at large now, not necessarily for India, but there will be a slow recovery in this. And, you know, it is very obvious that we can see that going forward, aviation is going to be far smaller than it was pre-COVID, and it'll take some time to recover. And I think all estimates of IATA and many other global bodies is that only in 24 do we see returning to pre-COVID situation. As per all expectations and even current experiences, there has been a huge financial impact, but also aviation has changed for the future. And I will come to that aspect a little later. But let me tell you that what will happen first is, and we're beginning to see that even as we speak, the resurgence of VFR, you know, visiting for family and relatives, etc., and that is beginning to happen. Leisure is beginning to happen, leisure travel, and of course, business travel will be hugely affected, has been hugely affected. And with remote working and you know, flexible working, unless you're absolutely critical to travel like you have just now, Ajay, it's going to be more and more remote working. And even by estimates of IATA, they do not see corporate travel come back to its full levels even in 24. They expect it to be around 70 to 80% of the pre-COVID levels. We also see a resurgence, of course, in domestic travel. China and all other countries have even crossed the limits of their pre-COVID levels. I believe in the US, and Ross would perhaps correct me, they expect domestic travel to reach its pre-COVID levels by the end of this year. This is an IATA estimate. In India, of course, it's much slower, and probably that's due to the vaccination process being a little bit slower. Not yet sure which states are open, and we are advocating, I think, to the Ministry of Tourism and to the Ministry of Aviation that people who are vaccinated twice should be allowed to travel without necessary any RT-PCR tests or even quarantine. I think they are working, both the ministries are working on this with the states. We hope that that will open up and we can see a resurgence in the domestic travel. So as far as what has been or what the future holds, I think you will see domestic travel bounce back first. You will see short haul holidays happen next, and then go on to the long haul holidays. So 24 is the recovery period. But in the meantime, what's happened is a lease of life has come through with cargo. So many airlines which didn't even monitor their cargo because it was such a small part of their revenue have started focusing, and it's given them a lease of life. And many of them, from 10 to 12%, are seeing almost 40% of their contribution coming from cargo. So a lot of financial restructuring is going to happen. There will be network optimization, network rationalization, and the whole process of travel will change. But I'll come to that only if you feel that I need to stress on how the behavior of the consumer will change going forward. But yes, I think in the long run, you will see latent demand. You may see airlines not being able to induct capacity as quickly as they had to let go of it. So post-24, I think there is optimism, and you will see demand fairly outstripping supply. So that's the future.
Thanks, Ragini. Thanks. I'll move on to Jyoti, another very distinguished colleague and friend. Amongst her many roles, Jyoti is president of the Travel Agents Association of India. She is vice chairperson of Federation of Associations in Tourism and Hospitality. She is chairperson for the Tourism and Hospitality Skills Council. And she's director New Airways Travels, her own venture. Jyoti, in the hotel business specifically, and I can say that for ourselves, in our group, we 50% of our jobs. So just to come jobs. I'm sure travel has been equally badly hit. Really means lives impacted, careers impacted, business impacted, not just impacted, but shattered and dramatically impacted. Run us through a little of that, Jyoti, and how do you?
Ajay, we've lost you, I think. Can everyone hear Ajay? No.
There was some problems with his audio.
Yeah, I think so too. So okay, I'll answer the question anyway, because I think what he was asking, I've got the gist of it. So good afternoon, everyone. Eminent speakers, the chair, special chair, chief guest, Mr. Arvindji. It's a pleasure meeting all of you again. Well, to answer Ajay's question, yes, the impact of COVID has been a lot. The COVID-19 is certainly one of its kind of the humanitarian disasters, I feel. It has affected people and the businesses worldwide, triggering a global economic crisis, and tourism sector is never far behind when any calamity like this occurs. I think the pandemic has affected the foreign exchange earnings, various regional developments, job opportunities, thereby disrupting the local communities as a whole. The Indian tourism industry and hospitality industry is staring at a huge potential job loss of around 38 million, which is literally 70% of the total workforce, and 15 lakh crore loss of revenue. And who better than Arvindji would be knowing that? But it's not over. So we need to accept and innovate. I think my experience as the Thai president has been very challenging and it's been a continuous commitment. Even before the total lockdown, we were very vigilant. The moment we came to hear the news about travel not being happening from many countries, so we became very vigilant. And our first challenge was, of course, the refund of tickets from airlines. That means money blockage. Then came the survival and desperation in the form of lockdown, no business, cash crunch, and unemployment, beyond the challenge of staying alive in both body and mind. So I do not believe in crying over spilt milk all the time, and I believe the entire calamity has been a huge learning curve. As the president, I also realized that associations and federations actually have wasted their time in the industry to network and partner with the government or support the country all these past years. It seems we have now currently just connected and come to know each other and revisited our working relationship in these last 16 months for the people who are actually now on the chair. We all know in India is the only country which has actually not got any monetary or fiscal reliefs. Could be in form of rebates, moratoriums, statutory respite, and anything to handhold or motivate the entire sector. Secondly, I also learned that patience is a virtue. Some things are beyond our control as human beings, and the catastrophe caused by the pandemic is certainly one such event. I feel proud to say that we are a very resilient industry, and that sentiment is very strong, and that's what is keeping us alive today also. And we've also seen that whenever such a occurrence has happened, we've always emerged stronger. As I also chair the Tourism and Hospitality Skill Council, which Ajay said, I would say it's the right time for young professionals, students to further enhance and reskill their skills, to be able to offer more tech-enabled travel post-pandemic, and also explore variants to connect to youth, who will be the keen travelers post-COVID. Tourism is most innovative and accommodative to new technology and new ideas and should be explored. Crisis always does bring opportunities. Countries in India will continue to depend on the long value chain of tourism. We all say traveling is about experiences, exploring, and people-to-people connect. But I also believe it boosts the longevity of life. So saying that, I'm going to say that these were my opening remarks on the question that Ajay asked. I don't know what other question he wanted to ask immediately, but is he back online? I'm trying to see him.
He's back online.
Yeah, he is back. I can see him. Yeah,
he is back online.
Okay.
Thanks, Jyoti. Thank you so much. I'll move to Sudeep. Sudeep, one of the reasons I thought of you is that you represent a US-based large global organization. Sudeep is the head of Intercontinental Hotel Group for Southwest Asia, has many years of hotel experience. And Sudeep, your thoughts, particularly in an Indo-American chamber meeting, of a perspective from a global US point of view, and perhaps some shedding some light on the similarities and differences between the India and the US on the handling of the pandemic or the looking at the pandemic. Sudeep, please unmute and come in.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mr. Bakaya. So, I think a lot of similarities, and listen, the whole world has been impacted by the crisis. So the level of impact within the US and India in terms of the percentage of reduction in tourism and so on are very similar, right? I think the other similarities specifically to sort of the hospitality industry, and I'm going to focus a little bit more on current and a little bit more on future. The current is, listen, the dynamics of what is happening within the hospitality industry in the two countries are almost identical, right? It is primarily domestic focused. Reason being, both the borders are pretty much shut, right? So it's the only travel is pretty much domestic. The non-urban locations are doing significantly better than the urban locations. Again, it's the same thing, people going out for leisure more than corporate travel. The very small booking window, typically, it's a couple days. And all that is very different than what the hospitality industry is normally facing, right? Where we have long booking windows, we've got a base business on the books, we've got corporate demand on the books, and so on. And I think those dynamics are identical between the two countries, right? Where the differences are, I think, is in the speed of recovery or the way of opening up. So, for example, and I think in my mind, the biggest reason for that is the level of vaccination, which is different within the two countries, right? So, and I think with more vaccination comes more confidence and a little more relaxation of travel restrictions, which makes it easier for people to travel. I know in the beginning you mentioned, Mr. Bakaya, you travel internationally and the route you have to take to get to where you are. And I think with vaccination, that's easing. And I think Ragini very aptly put it in the beginning, where it says if you're vaccinated, hopefully no RT-PCR test, and that will make it a lot easier for you to plan and do travel and so on. There, I think the US is far ahead of where we are in India, right? And as a consequence, they've opened up their the restrictions, and we're seeing that. And the reason, and as a consequence, we're seeing that the difference in the US, for example, is that today, if you're double vaccinated, you don't necessarily have to wear a mask. You don't necessarily have to social distance. And we're seeing that impact in our hotels, because as a consequence, the typical fiberglass barrier in the front desk between the guest and the customer it's gone. So we've had to update our sort of protocols very quickly, adapting to what's happening in the country. But the positive nature coming out of it, and maybe that's not the right word, but I think the silver lining coming out of that is we know that this is going to get back to normal at one point. How quickly will depend on the speed of vaccination in our mind, or really herd immunity, because I guess there are two parts to that: vaccination or infection, right? So that's where we are seeing the differences currently. The second thing, Mr. Bakaya, what we're seeing is what the customer is demanding. And though it's a domestic travel between the two countries, and we've done some surveys of the customers, we're seeing the demands coming out are very, very similar. The focus in the future, they want it to be on hygiene and safety. That seems to be the biggest factor currently. And you can see that's very topical, because that's what we've been dealing with for the last couple of months. The second thing is the penetration of technology in areas which were unprecedented in the past, especially in terms of contactless check-in, check-out, QR codes for menu. That's becoming standard, and that's becoming true regardless of the countries and where they are in the technology cycle. I think that's now the demand of the day by the customers. And what we found, which was surprising to me, at least a little counterintuitive because of the deep crisis which we're in, is the demand for responsible travel. So, 82% of the people surveyed in our surveys, customers said that their future travel decisions will be based on how responsible a hotel and or a company is, and that will impact the choice they will make as where to stay, which was heartening to hear, because I know the industry is moving in that direction. But I thought it would take a back burner during this crisis moment, but it's still come out as something right on top on people's customers' mind as they make the decision. So that seems to be more or less what we are facing. We're all hoping that with increased vaccination, we'll see the same sort of relaxation. But the biggest thing it's given us is the confidence that the travel will be back at one point. And we are seeing that, I think Ragini mentioned well, in China and the US, the demand is back. The rate is still following, but the occupancies are back very, very close to pre-COVID levels.
Thanks, Sudhir. Thank you. And I hope I share your optimism, and I hope you're both correct in seeing a recovery. But it's certainly very definitely linked to vaccinations and the speed of vaccination. You're also very, very right on the technology part of things. Even smaller places, I've been to Doha, Johannesburg, Lusaka, Nairobi, very tiny cities, but everything is pre-digital, everything is QR coded, and you may have a queue, but it's all zero contact, etc., etc., etc. So yes, digital has come a long, long way, and is a greater part of our lives. Ross, I will invite you to join us in a more active manner. Ross Beliveau is a commercial officer at the US Embassy. He manages travel, tourism, ICT, education, etc. Ross has worked on active duty in the US Army. He was an MBA in international trade policy, etc., etc. Ross, you heard us all speak and give our views. Let's hear from you, your perspective, your paradigm. How do you see things? More importantly, how do you see things tomorrow in India and perhaps in the Indo-US sector? Ross, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Ajay, and thanks so much to IACC and the North India team for inviting me to be with you. It's you billed me as the guest of honor, but frankly, the honor is mine. It's a wonderful opportunity to be here with such an august panel, and I'm learning a lot listening to you. I want to underscore kind of the first thing is really the criticality and the importance of US-India travel. And it's important for a number of reasons. I think a couple figures bear mention just to show how important it is to us and why we're so focused on this sector. Just a few years ago in 2018, India became the 10th largest visitation market to the United States. It broke into the top 10 with about 1.4 million visitors. Interestingly, that grew even more in 2019. But what I find kind of most notable about Indian travelers to the US is while they may be the 10th largest, they're the fifth largest spending market. So when Indians travel to the United States, they spend money and they spend considerable amounts of time in the US. And we love having Indian travelers to the US. And they're also autonomous travelers. You know, they're not necessarily the ones coming and joining the budget bus tour. They're more likely to travel widely throughout the United States, rent cars. I mean, let's be honest, if you can drive in India, there's nowhere you can't drive in the United States. So of having Indian travelers come to the US. You know, it's important to note, obviously, what COVID has done. And I think we all understand that probably the travel and tourism sector has been one of the most affected. But I am heartened by some of the things that we're seeing. I know, Regini mentioned one or two things about airlines. You know, one of the things that we've seen are some new routes that are being launched. We've got United Airlines launched its Chicago to Delhi route in 2020. And then they're looking for the San Francisco to Bangalore route in October of 2021. Air India, they launched a Bangalore to San Francisco and Hyderabad Chicago route in January of this year. And American Airlines is scheduling its debut in October of this year with two new routes from New Delhi to JFK and from Seattle to Bangalore. So these are things that give us some hope and give us some optimism. And I have to say that one of the things probably that's on a lot of people's minds right now with regard to travel between the US and India is the visa situation. I know that a lot of people have a lot of questions about that, and it's probably personally affected people on this panel and many in our audience today. So I actually met with one of our visa counselor chiefs just a couple of days ago so that I could kind of provide a little bit of an update on where we stand with that, so you know kind of what's coming down the line. There's the presidential proclamation, which prohibits entry by anyone who's been physically present in India for the past 14 days. And there are exceptions to that, obviously, if you're US citizens or a legal permanent resident, but otherwise it can be quite difficult to get to the United States directly from India right now. You know, I get asked about when that's going to end, and the answer is really quite simple. As the COVID situation improves in India, that's when we can look for that to be lifted, and that's coming straight out of the president's in the executive office. But we're hopeful that as India goes forward, and as Sudeep mentioned, the importance of vaccination, I think he's spot on. That's really what's going to continue to drive travel. Right now, the main focus is the student visas, and so the embassy is doing everything it can to ensure that as many students as possible make it to the US in time for their program start dates. And that's very, very important. Now, I'll say coming down the line, and we are hoping to see an increase in appointments for H and L visas starting maybe as soon as August. So the second COVID wave, unfortunately, really set things back. But the next move will be to be granting more H and L visa appointments. There's also logistics, about, getting COVID-19 tests and all of that. But, all of the latest and greatest in that can be looked at on the embassy's website for travel to the United States and in other places. So, without going too much farther, I just want to say, I had the good fortune to be at a small reception with Secretary of State Blinken. You may be aware he visited this week, and he said something that really resonated with me, because it's something similar to what I often say myself, and that's that the U.S.-India relationship is one of the most consequential relationships of any two countries on earth, and I completely agree with that. I've been in this country for almost a year now. And I've really started to understand better kind of the common goals and values that we share. And frankly, travel and tourism and the exchange of culture that comes as a result of that, you know, the people-to-people ties and the people-to-place ties that are developed as a result of that travel really, really change one's perspective on another country, because it no longer becomes a far-off place or a concept or an idea, but it becomes a group of people with hopes and dreams just like yours. And you know, once you've visited a place, it does change the way you feel about it on a very permanent basis. So, you know, with that, I would say I'm excited about, you know, where we're headed. It's been a pretty dark path for sure, but there are green shoots. And you know, Regini talked again about 2024. Certainly things have gone more slowly than we might have hoped, but as we kind of continue, for us, we want to do everything that we can do to support U.S. people coming to India and Indians traveling to the U.S. And with that, if you have any questions or follow-ups, great. But again, so great to be here with you.
Thank you, Ross. Thanks for those excellent insights. Thanks for your perspective. Shri Arvind Singh ji, I'm sorry I kept you waiting so long and I'm coming to your last. But I wanted you to hear everyone else's thoughts before we go down and heard yours. Arvind Singh ji is a 1988 Indian Administrative Service batch graduate. He's Stephens College Delhi alumni, and he's also from the Delhi School of Economics. He has phenomenal experience, including working on the ground as a district collector, Kolhapur in Maharashtra. Mr. Singh moved to the center in 2001, and he's worked in several ministries, including commerce and shipping, and as private secretary to the Minister of Agriculture. He took charge as Secretary Minister of Tourism in January 2021, right in the middle of the pandemic. So it's a great time, and possibly the most challenging to pick up a new assignment. His previous assignment was Chairman Airport Authority of India, so he is well blooded and well experienced in aviation and hospitality. Mr. Singh has attended courses at Graduate Institute Geneva and at Harvard. So when a situation like this happens, you hear a lot of people complaining. I for one, have been on the complainer side for the last few months, saying the government hasn't done enough for us. And perhaps our perspective is limited to our own industries. Perhaps it's also that much more vocal because of the anguish we faced directly. But maybe we're not seeing the overall picture. So we'd like to hear from you on the government thoughts on how to get India out of this difficult situation, and with particular relevance to tourism, to hospitality, to aviation. Over to you, sir.
Well, thank you, Mr. Bakaya, and all the distinguished panelists, my earlier speakers who have spoken. Thank you. You know, most of us have gone through the pain and the anguish of the pandemic since March last year, and we have shared the same experiences. In my earlier stint with as chairman of the Airport Authority of India, I dealt with the first wave of the pandemic, and you know, we all saw the government's response. The government was preoccupied with creating the basic infrastructure that time, because the roads and the railway networks were closed, and air travel was the only way, or air cargo was the only way through which testing equipment, PPEs, medical equipment, medicines, and other things could be reached to various parts of the country, including to far off, say, in the northeast, deep south, or to the northern hilly states. And this happened in the month of March and April and May last year, especially when domestic flights had closed, the railways were not working, and the roadways were under lockdown because there was a complete lockdown after the end of March. Then we saw that wave, you know, kind of recede, and the government stepped in with physical benefits, with you know, benefits in terms of moratorium on loans, relaxations in PF contributions, and other measures which the finance ministry stepped in with. And we saw a revival of domestic tourism a few months later, especially after October, in the winter months, when, as some of the earlier speakers have mentioned, we saw that outside the metros, there was a revival, especially in the wildlife areas or the hilly places of Goa. There was a mad rush and a huge rush of tourists, October onwards. We started feeling that, domestic tourism is getting back on its tracks. Similarly, domestic civil aviation had almost reached 80% of the pre-COVID level, by February or March of this year. And that's when the second wave happened. And that again put brakes on both the growth of civil aviation and on the growth of domestic tourism. Now the second wave cases are going down and we are seeing green shoots of domestic recovery in various places. But I agree with all the speakers earlier that international travel will take time to bounce back. The only hope is that domestic aviation and domestic tourism both will come back and recover faster. Now, as far as the government's response, I think initially, in terms of after containing the pandemic, there have been a host of measures by all different wings of the government. I'm sure the Commerce Ministry came out with policies for exporters. The Finance Ministry came out with the relaxations I mentioned in terms of statutory compliances, PF contribution limits, in terms of moratorium on loans, and the emergency credit linked guarantee scheme, loan scheme, wherein the government is giving guarantees on loans to MSMEs. And very recently, it came out with such a scheme for the tourism sector specifically, where the sector participants would get loans at very concessional rates. This is the recent announcement that has come. So there have been a host of measures from the Finance Ministry. The Tourism Ministry tried to set up we had a task force set up in 2020 under our then minister. The task force met with the state representatives, decided on suitable policies. COVID level protocols were circulated to all the hotels, and we started a process of self-certification. The jury is still out whether such a system can work in India, but that process was started, where hotels and accommodation units started self-certifying themselves that they were doing, maintaining all the COVID-related protocols. And that helped build a certain level of confidence. Now the vaccination has started. We have taken it up with the state governments that vaccination of all the health, or the vaccination of all the tourism-related stakeholders, be it drivers, be it tour operators, be it hotel employees, be it hotel management, these should be taken up on priority so that we get a sense of confidence that all stakeholders in the tourism sector are fully vaccinated. And that will give a sense of confidence, as Mr. Jain mentioned, to the customer who wants to go to a safe place. If he knows that all the employees and all the persons he's going to meet are fully vaccinated, that instills a sense of confidence. There are a host of other measures also stranded in India that we did to help foreign tourists who were stranded in places like Goa to go out of the country, and we received a very good feedback on that. Yes, recently the government came up with two new announcements for the tourism sector. The finance minister announced it herself, which there were loans provided for tour operators as well as guides, and also the announcement of free visas for the first 5 lakh visitors who come on international visas, tourist visas, to come into the country, and that has been widely welcomed. You're right that yes, maybe we did not meet the expectations of all stakeholders of the society, because there was a lot of expectation of further fiscal benefits or further kind of monetary reliefs. But we, the finance ministry, all of us are in continuous dialogue. We are interacting with the industry. We're taking up whatever short-term measures can be taken or announced, and then whatever measures are to be taken in the medium term or long term. There is no denying the fact that there has been economic losses and job losses in the sector. We commissioned a study to the NCAER, and some of you might have read reports of that, which came out in the press as an answer to a parliament question. And that study quantifies what has been the loss to the tourism economy in terms of value addition, in terms of revenue generation, and in terms of employment. And there have been significant hits that the sector has taken, and there's no denying that. And I'm sure we'll continue to work with the industry to take short-term measures, medium and long-term measures to help it revive as early as possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Singh. Jyoti, we saw wave one and we went through it with a fair amount of optimism, saying we'll ride it out. We saw things get better and then we saw wave two. I am hopeful that we don't see wave three, at least in our part of the world. But really, from the last 1.5 years, what can we do to prepare ourselves to handle something similar, any calamity in the future? How can we prepare ourselves to be
thank you,
better
Ajay.
placed?
Yeah, your voice is actually breaking up in between, so I think there's some connectivity issue where you are enjoying yourself. But anyway, just to talk about,
I'm working hard.
I can see that. So I think your question was more on how we are going to rebuild lives and businesses, and what we can do for further on, right? Is that right? I can't.
Yeah.
Okay.
If can you hear me now?
Yeah, slightly better. Yes. Yeah.
Question. We've been through all this. Are we any wiser? How are we better prepared, or how can we be better prepared if something similar happens again?
Yeah, so I'll just say that. So we as an industry are, need to, of course, rebuild lives and businesses, and not repeating the valuable sentiments shared by all the speakers and eminent speakers. We just heard, yes, vaccinations and other measures which we'll need to build and motivate the customer. But I see as an industry are so busy talking about COVID and trying to survive that we are really not focusing on the change habits, the change demographic of the traveler and destinations. And I say that, because I think we need to rebuild and revisit and reinvent and restructure our business models. But going beyond that, what you asked me just now was how can we handle a similar extreme eventualities? I think the habits need to change. It certainly needs to take a while. It will take a while to come back to yesterday. And we need to surpass today to think about the tomorrow, because in our past does lie the future. And we need to learn from our mistakes. So as agents, I think we need to be very cash smart and see how we can protect this industry. Agents need to be prepared, and contracts, I think, must be very well read with a lot of flexibility into cancellation policies, refund policies, which if the agents are hearing me, they would like to hear this, because, I think they have really struggled with the entire process. So money protection of both consumer and agents will be playing a very important role going forward. And I say this especially for Arvindji, because I know he's been in the aviation industry and I've been always looking out for his support in the aviation industry. We need to see how we can protect our money, especially from the airlines and airlines going, bust. Because we have seen Jet Airways and other airlines going. So that plays a very huge role in our reviving, actually. And as the population, we have seen that we know that we have to be educated on safety and hygiene protocols, and we need to keep continuing the process of education, because keeping abreast and investing in technology, education and skilling would be a huge sustainable model. Because I would say that because we need to invest in sustainable tourism and responsible tourism, which even Ross said, and we should be remained committed to domestic travel. Because if a calamity like this ever occurs back, we need to see what new avenues and we can explore within our own country. That will also enable us to, have a very stronger infrastructure. And we should be exploring new avenues like adventure, rural cruises, river cruises, wellness. India is a plethora, and we need to reinvest our own country to see that. Of course, we need to be properly incentivized to see that this travel also happens. And that's another thing which we've been asking the government regularly, to see that how we can do that. Because I believe responsible and sustainability will be the core point, both in business destinations and business development, with a lot of cooperation and collaboration and coordination between countries to open international borders and to have unified policies across India to see that we do not struggle with the safety protocols. And in the end, I would also say that most importantly, we need to become very self-dependent. We need to create and see how the government can help us to create these tourism funds to take care of a catastrophe like this really occurs again. And also we would need a pool of strength to see how the agents and the entire fraternity carries a standardized form of working further with, being recognized by the ministry, because Arvindji remarked on our finance minister talking about some, reliefs and rebates for some agents, but 900 agents, I don't think run the country. They are much beyond. So we need to see how we can register them, how we can standardize the whole process to make it more effective, and that the agents come into the gambit of being, there. And finally, I think we need to be committed to our life, our own life, and our businesses, because government cannot always be helping us out, and they cannot keep educating us again and again how to sanitize, how to wear a mask. I think these are something which we need to be committed to ourselves in our life and businesses. So I will, that's what
Thanks,
I would.
Jyoti. Fantastic. Fantastic. So thank you so much. Fantastic. You're saying self-reliance, re-engage, increase your range, metamorphosize, rebuild yourselves. Fantastic. Thanks for that. I think we need to add a little bit of spice to this discussion. Ragini, one of my concerns as a traveler is when I fly an airline, and I'm talking domestic in India, the rates haven't come down, didn't ever go down, pandemic or no pandemic. And as a hotelier, when I look at people paying rates in my hotels, it's an absolute disaster. Now, I believe the airline industry manages or controls base rates, and you can't get a ticket below a certain rate. How good or bad is that, Ragini?
Now you touched a raw nerve, so I'm glad you said you respect that, because I think fares or fare control should not be something that should be handled by the government. It should be left to the commercial decisions of the airlines. And for the last 16 to 17 months, and I can understand that it was done at a particular time of the crisis to create a base fare, etc. But beyond that, I think the commercial decisions need to be left to the airline, both on capacity and on fare. And when capacity gets controlled, Ajay, obviously you know this better than me, your fares will rise, right? But fares need to open up and be left to the commercial decisions of the airline. So I don't think anywhere else in the world this practice is happening where fares are controlled, and at a time when the costs have gone phenomenally high on the fuel costs. So in fact, in India, when you say that the fares are high, I would urge you to look at what is the component of the taxation on the fuel. Firstly, the fuel costs, which is almost about 60 to 70% higher on the domestic market in terms of when you add the taxes back. So it's the fuel cost, it's the taxation, and in my view, very, very low fares. It's a double whammy. So it's not the kind where aviation can make money. And this is something that we've been lobbying with the government, because unless a taxation on fuel comes down, which is the highest component of cost for an airline, almost 45% of your cost is with the fuel cost, you will not see the fares become better. And the fares will become better if the airlines are allowed to handle their own destiny.
Rags, I'd be so happy to link up with the airlines and peg my hotel room rates to airline fares. I think we do a lot better than what we're doing right now. But having said that, I'm told we have about 2 odd minutes to finish the session. We have a couple of minutes, so I'm going to zip past Sudeep and Ross and go back to Shri Arvind Singh Ji. So your suggestions, your words of wisdom before we close the session. Mr. Singh, please come in, sir.
I'm sure, the points that were mentioned about, say, the cap on fares or the restrictions on, the market is the best answer to that. And Ragini did hint that when in the earlier situation, there was a restriction on the curtailment on the sectors that you could go in, the airlines could not open up, and it was opened up to about 80%. And I was privy to some of the discussions of that in my earlier assignment. And I'm sure the mood was that as and when, it comes back to normal, it will go back. So I think the earlier we reach normalcy, I think these kind of restrictions will definitely go back. But I will just sum up some of the points that have been made by the earlier speakers. One is, of course, the use of technology that we're going to see significantly. In the airports, for instance, overnight, without any preparation or anything, we all through all the national airports, the private airports, we had to shift to a contactless system of check-in and check-out and boarding. And it paid dividends because very gradually, after the initial hiccups, when people were thinking they would contract the disease, then I think word spread in the country that this was the safest way to travel. And we saw it in the numbers when the domestic travel, air travel really started picking up. Similarly, contact processes were done at all the leading hotels, at all the places, and people who were certifying them. Now, if you go to a hotel, you see only, online menus and the physical menus have gone away. If you go to any restaurant. So you will see more and more use of technology, more and more, a shift towards sustainable tourism and responsible travel practices, as Jyoti also mentioned. And to take that further, we have circulated a national strategy paper on sustainable tourism. We are thinking of entering into a memorandum of understanding with the Responsible Tourism Society of India and the UN Environment Program to launch a campaign for responsible travel, responsible tourism within the country. So I think sustainability, use of more technology, safety, hygiene, going off to places where you can be on your own, enjoy nature. These are going to be the hallmarks of the future. But of course, since this is an Indo-American Chamber of Commerce session, I have to highlight the importance of US, in the tourism and civil aviation sector. The US is our largest market. The largest number of inbound international travelers come from the US. And similarly, a large number of Indians travel to US, which was mentioned by Ross, that India has now become the 10th largest, and the growth was significant. Pre-COVID, it was growing almost 10% year on year. And we were expecting that growth to continue. Hopefully, we'll bounce back once the COVID goes back. So I will sum up and say that once normalcy reduces, we will expect to see more and more inbound travelers from the US. We will go in for campaigns, and we'll ensure that our country provides a safe and secure, is a safe and secure place for travel for the large number of tourists who come to India from the United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, Mr. Singh. Mr. Bhasin, we are out of time. I'd like to thank Shri Arvind Singh ji, Mr. Bhasin, Sudeep, Ross, Ragini, Jyoti, all of you for your time. Thank you ever so much.
Ajay, just can I come in before you close? I need to speak one thing with Arvindji. Arvindji, we really need you to go beyond air bubbles. And secondly, please announce a date for e-visas, because that's going to help us and motivate us and start planning. I know you said it's going to happen, but we really want a date coming in for the entire fraternity to start planning at least and get motivated to travel further.
We act on it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ajay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ajay.
Thank you, everyone.